Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archaeoviking. Today is the second video for 2025's Halloween season. The subject of today's video is a history of fox spirits and fox cults in Imperial China. But before we get into that, first I want to address sort of what this video is based on. So, one of the most common, arguably the most common, uh, horror movie monster or monster type uh, is that of vampiric creatures, not necessarily vampires themselves, but we'll get to that in a second, but vampiric creatures who drain the life force out of human beings for sustenance, whether it be actual vampires, like in John Carpenter's Vampires series, where whether it's the original Vampires movie or Vampires Los Muertos that you see here, but it can also be beings that suck rather than blood, like regular traditional vampires. Rather than that, it can be beings that just suck your literal soul or life energy or what have you, such as succubi and incubi, as seen in this movie here, simply titled Succubus. And in East Asia, there are multiple different creatures that fit that category, the category of draining your life force rather than blood. That still fits within the vampiric definition, but does not necessarily equate actual vampires. And among these creatures that are vampiric and drain your life energy are those of the fox spirits, sometimes called hujing or hulajing, uh, or in Japan, kitsune or kitsune, um, or Gitsune, uh, what what have you, fox spirits fit that category. Now, for today's video, we are going to specifically look at the Chinese fox spirits, that being the Hujing, also known as Hulijing, Hulijing, that you see here and here. Don't worry, at some point I do have plans to do a video on the Japanese and Korean versions of fox spirits. However, they have their own deep histories and their own cultural distinctions and characteristics, separate from the Chinese version of fox spirits, or branch of fox spirits. So for this video, we're going to focus specifically on the Chinese cultural aspects and fox spirits that fit within the broader Chinese cultural folklore. And that leads us into our next section to look at the earliest references to fox spirits in China. So the earliest reference to fox spirits in China appear in the Shanhai Jing, or the Classic of Mountains and Seas, which dates from China's Warring States period to the Western Han Dynasty, uh, roughly between 475 BCE to 9 CE. Though, as we'll talk about later on in the video, there are further additions and edits to this document in later Chinese dynasties as well. But with that in mind, the Shanhai Jing, Classic of Mountains and Seas, states that, quote, the land of Blue Hills lies to the north, where the inhabitants consume the five grains, wear silk and worship foxes that have four legs and nine tails. And then later in chapter 14 of the Classic of Mountains and Seas, the document states that, quote, 300 li, the Chinese measurement for distance, 300 li farther east is Qingqi Mountain, where much jade can be found on its south slope and green cinnabar on its north. There is a beast here whose form resembles a fox with nine tails. It makes a sound like a baby and is a man-eater. Whoever eats it will be protected against insect poison, also known as goo. Um, And here's the source that I got this information from. But as you can see from this document, fairly early on in the earliest mentions of fox spirits in Chinese folklore and other Chinese documents, fox spirits were already man eaters, or already ate human beings to some degree. And here's a map of the warring, what the late warring states period of China would have looked like. And here's a map of the Qin dynasty, the first unified Chinese dynasty since the Zhou dynasty, which preceded the Warring States period. And I've already done a video on the Qin dynasty that I will include in the iCard. And then here is the Western Han dynasty and its extent. And again, I've already done a video on the Han dynasty that I will also include in the iCard. Which actually brings us to the next section, fox spirits during the Han dynasty. And here again is a map of the Western Han Dynasty, and then here's a map of the Eastern Han Dynasty, with the Han Dynasty broadly lasting from 202 BCE to 220 CE. Now, of course, as those of you who've seen my Han Dynasty video remember, at some point there is a minor like breaking that where a Han Dynasty official attempted to create his own dynasty known as the Jin Dynasty. Um, Not to be mistaken with the later Jin Dynasty that we'll talk about later on in the video. It's complicated again. I've done a video on this already, but it isn't, something that is important to bring up to at least some degree. So during the Han Dynasty, fox spirits began to become associated with both immortal beings and gods known as Xiang or Shin, and ghosts and spirits also known as Shin, only as you can see spelled slightly differently. And during the Han Dynasty, some esoteric texts described the nine-tailed foxes as good omens instead of man-eaters. For example, the Bai Hu Tong, the comprehensive discussions in the White Tiger Hall, written sometime between 25 and 220 CE, states, and I quote, "What is the nine-tailed fox? When a fox dies, it turns its head toward the hill where it was born. When it does not forget its place of where it does not sorry, it does not forget its place of origin. It means that in comfort a man must never lose sight of impending calamities. Why must this fox appear with nine tails? When the nine concubines of the king each receive their proper place, his sons and grandsons will enjoy abundant peace. Why is the emphasis laid upon the tail? It is to indicate that his prosperity shall be numerous." And here is the source that I got for that. But as you can see here, even as in the Han Dynasty and of course preceding dynasties in the Warring States period, nine-tailed foxes and the greater fox spirit corpus overall were being described as man-eaters. There were also other documents that were describing them again as good omens, or at least describing them in a more positive light. And then in late Han Dynasty texts, fox spirits would begin to develop the ability to shapeshift into human form and also gain the ability to bewitch people. Which you can see in this picture here, where it's a beautiful woman who on the surface looks human, but if you can see based on the shadow, she is a fox spirit in disguise. Also, during the Han Dynasty, nine-tailed foxes were depicted as attendants to the Queen Mother of the West, the most powerful female Taoist deity, or the most powerful Taoist goddess. Uh, Nine-tailed foxes were also particularly connected with the Queen Mother of the West's ability to grant immortality, as well as both cause calamities and protect people from calamities. It's also important to note some of the earliest depictions of nine-tailed fox spirits depicted the other tails as branching off from the main tail rather than each tail branching off from the base of the tail right here, i.e., being separate tails. In essence, each tail was an extension of the original tail. Uh, and another important thing to note, during the Han Dynasty, Buddhism would arrive in China through the Silk Road, of course, from India. And this would happen rather gradually, and it would not be necessarily adopted as a dominant religion yet. But the point is, it still arrived during this period of time, as you can see in this map here. Which brings us to our next section, fox spirits during the Jin Dynasty, to be mistaken with the Jin Dynasty that briefly happened between the Western and Eastern Han Dynasty, and also fox spirits in the Northern and Southern Dynasties period. And I've already done a in-depth video on both the Jin Dynasty and the Northern and Southern Dynasties period that I will also include in the iCard. Uh, Starting with the Jin Dynasty, which lasted roughly from 266 to 420 CE. And this is generally the broad territorial extent of the Jin Dynasty. And then eventually it would collapse and it would be separated into the Northern and Southern dynasties during the Northern and Southern dynasty periods from 420 to 589 CE. And this is not necessarily how the northern and southern dynasties always looked, but this gives you a general idea of what sort of would have looked like, with like the Northern Wei, which was the most powerful of the northern dynasties um, throughout this period, and then the Liu Song, which is just one of several southern Chinese dynasties that appeared in quick succession with each other. And so during this period, such as the Jin Dynasty, Guo Pu, a Jin Dynasty historian, poet, and writer, would further edit descriptions of fox spirits in the Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, doing this sometime between 276 and 324 CE. Um, and Guo Pu in these edits, would describe the shape-shifting abilities and other features of fox spirits, stating that, quote, when a fox is 50 years old, it can transform itself into a woman. When 100 years old, it becomes a beautiful woman or a spirit medium or an adult man who has sexual intercourse with women. Such beings are able to know things at more than 1,000 miles distance. They can poison men by sorcery, or possess and bewilder them so that they lose their memory and knowledge. And when a fox is 1,000 years old, it ascends to heaven and becomes a celestial fox. And here is where I got that information from. But as you can see, during this period of time, the idea of fox spirits and their abilities was beginning to both evolve and grow from its original point of being a a good omen, and sometimes a good omen and sometimes a man eater, but generally just completely a fox. And then during the Northern and Southern dynasties, nine-tailed foxes and the Queen Mother of the West were depicted in tombs of Chinese aristocrats, which you can see here and here. And here's the full mural zoomed out here. And also during this period of time, fox spirits were described as being able to steal a person's life force by cutting their hair. And we can see this in the Liaoyang uh, Ji, or a record of Buddhist temples in Liaoyang, where it describes the story of Sun Yan, a coffin carrier, where in the story Sun Yan's wife was revealed to be a fox in disguise, and the fox is described to have at first, and I quote, transformed into a woman dressed up with makeup and walked on the streets. People who met her were drawn to her charm, but those who came near her got their hair cut off. At the time, women who wore flashy dresses were accused as fox demons. These incidents began in the fourth month of Xi Ping. It did not end until the autumn of that year. And here's the source that I got this from. And then similar stories are noted in the Wei Shu, or the History of Wei, specifically noting that in 477 CE, quote, in the first year of the Taihei period, fox demons cut off people's hair. At the time, Empress Dowager Wen Ming governed the court. It was a sign of impropriety. It states that later in 517 CE, quote, from the spring of the second year of the of the Jiping reign, fox demons cut people's hair in the imperial capital. People were frightened. In the sixth month of the same year, Empress Dowager Ling gathered all haircutters and ordered them to be whipped by the Chongjun guard, Liu Ding, outside the gate of 1,000 years. And here's the source that I got this information from. But as you can see in this document, already the idea that foxes could uh, steal people's life force rather than just be simply man eaters, as earlier versions showed, they were, or at least alluded to, they just alluded that they physically ate people. Um, in this version, they are beginning to actually steal people's life force. Now, of course, I know there's, an exception to that a little bit earlier with the Jin Dynasty source mentioning people's life force being stolen, but this seems to be where it's really beginning to be developed into a stealing your life force rather than physically eating a person. Now, this brings us to our next section, fox spirits during the Tang Dynasty. With the Tang Dynasty lasting from 618 to 907 CE. And here is a map of the greatest extent of the Tang Dynasty, with the Tang Dynasty actually being one of the largest Chinese empires, with its main territorial area being this red, pinkish red spot, but its large area of influence and military control, and its uh, control over protectorates and tributaries and things such as that, um, being out at least as far as this purple-ish brown outline here. And then this, of course, is the full extent of its like tributaries and protectorates, as they were called. Essentially, people who were not necessarily within the Tang Dynasty Empire itself, but were under direct influence of the Tang Dynasty Empire. And during the Tang Dynasty, the connection between the Queen Mother of the West and fox spirits would begin to disappear from Taoist texts. And this was because the Queen Mother of the West was beginning to be equated with the Buddhist deity Kuan Yin. However, the connection between the Queen Mother of the West and the fox spirits would continue in non-Taoist texts. And it's also during the Tang Dynasty that male fox spirits were described as taking the form of literati, and female fox spirits were described as taking the form of courtesans and concubines. With male fox spirits being viewed with derision as literati were often viewed as inferior to the Tang Dynasty aristocracy due to the literati often being of low class backgrounds. Oftentimes, they were individuals who rose to rank and achieved rank by taking the imperial examination. And so they gained some degree of status and oftentimes could rise to very high political status, but it didn't change the fact that many of the Tang Dynasty aristocracy viewed them as peasants. In contrast, female fox spirits were viewed with sympathy and compassion and as beautiful. And this is due to the generally more positive view of concubines and courtesans in the Tang court as compared to the male literati. Of course, courtesans and concubines could still be viewed with some degree of derision, or at least viewed as inferior to some degree because of the traditional patriarchal society within China. And then also during the Tang Dynasty, uh, Hugh May fox demons and Hugh May vulpine enchantresses were used. The phrase Hugh May fox demon and the phrase Hugh May vulpine enchantress were used interchangeably. And we can see this in a poem by the Tang poet Bai Zhu Yi, who wrote a poem combining fox magic with the fox's deluding nature to warn of the danger of beautiful women, with the poem reading, and I quote, When a fox specter of an old grave is growing old, it changes into a woman of lovely features. Its head changes into a female coiffure. Uh, I may have butchered that, and I apologize. Its face is painted continents. The big tail it trails behind becomes a long red petticoat. Slowly, she strides along the path between rustic hamlets, and where at sunset no human sounds are heard. She sings, she dances, and alternatively laments and wails, without raising her eyebrows, velvety as the kingfisher, but bowing her pretty face. She bursts into a fit of laughter, a myriad of joys. 8 or 9 out of 10 who behold her are beguiled. If false beauties may fascinate a man in such a manner, the attraction exercised by genuine beauties will surely will surpass it. Such false and such genuine beauties both can bewilder a man, but the human mind dislikes what is false and prefers what is real. Hence, a fox disguised as a female demon can do but little harm, nor can beguile a man's eyes for longer than a day or night. But a woman acting like a Hume vulpine enchantress is the cause of absolute ruin, for the harm she does to a man's mind grows with each passing day. And here's the source that I got this poem from. But as you can see in this poem, generally the idea is that foxes who are um, become vulpine enchantresses, or women who act like them, are essentially horrible monsters. They cause, as it says, absolute ruin to men, um, and things like that. So generally negative connotations. And then we also have during the Tang Dynasty, the word Hu for fox and Hu for barbarian would also become interchangeable terms. And this is especially the case when Tang officials referred to the Turkic peoples of Mongolia in Central Asia, such as the Sogdians. And we can actually see an example of the use of Hu fox and the word Hu for fox and Hu for barbarian being used as derogatory terms in a conversation that is recorded to have happened between Turkish Chinese generals An Lushan and Geshu Han during the 700s CE, in uh, which states that, quote, he, An Lushan, suddenly said to Han, my father was a Western Hu barbarian. My mother was a Turk. Your father was a Turk. Your mother was a Western barbarian. I am the same race as you. Why can't we be friends? Han replied that the ancients used to say it is a bad omen if a wild Hu fox barks at his lair, for he has forgotten his origins. Lu Shan thought Han was disparaging his Hu origin. He became very angry and cursed Han, saying, does a Turk dare to act thus? Han wished to reply, but Gao Li Shi gave him a look and stopped him. And we can see this is the source that I got this information from. But as you can see in this source, this in this case, the one people who are viewed as barbarians or savage or what have you by traditional Tang Dynasty in Chinese thought were being described as monsters, demons, etc. They were being described equated to fox spirits, or one could argue a literal case of demonization. And just for reference, here is a map of the Sogdian Kingdom, here roughly around Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, or modern day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And then here is a map of the preceding dynasty to the Tang Dynasty, the Sui Dynasty. And then here are, in relation, are the Western Gurk-Turk Khaganate, or Khaganate, and the Eastern Gurk-Turk Khaganate. And then here is the Tang Dynasty, and again at its greatest extent over here. And here's the Eastern Gurk-Turk Khaganate. Uh, and then again the Tang Dynasty, and here is the Uyghur Khaganate, which is also a Turkic confederation Khaganate, whatever you want to call it. And then also during the Tang Dynasty, fox spirits began to be associated with foreign religions such as Buddhism and foreign Buddhist monks, which emphasized the otherness of foreign religions and the Tang view of the superiority of native Chinese religions such as Taoism. However, it must also be noted that Buddhism was still a popular religion in Tang Dynasty China. And then we have the Tang Dynasty book, the Youyang Zhazhu, miscellaneous morsels from Youyang, which makes a connection between nine-tailed foxes and divine beings, with this book being written sometime in the 800s CE, with the Youyang Zhazhu, miscellaneous morsels from Youyang, describing the connection between nine-tailed foxes and divine beings, stating that, quote, among the arts of the way, there is a specific doctrine of the celestial fox. The doctrine says that the celestial fox has nine tails and a golden color. It serves in the palace of the sun and the moon and has its own Fu talisman and a Xiao ritual. It can transcend yin and yang. And here's the source that I got this from. But as you can see here, again, we have some complexity happening here. So we have, text stating that fox spirits can drain your life force. They have text stating that they are uh, equivalent to uh, peasants, low class individuals who are stealing power from the rightful, say, the rightful aristocracy. You have texts saying that they are the same as barbarians, but then you also have texts like this stating that they are equivalent to deities and gods, or at least in some way connected to celestial beings and the heavens, the celestial realm, whatever you want to call it. And then we also begin to see during the Tang Dynasty the rise of the popular worship of fox spirits, specifically in northern Chinese villages, with a later Imperial Chinese text titled Hu Xin, or Fox Gods, stating that, quote, since the beginning of the Tang, many commoners have worshipped fox spirits. They make offerings in their bedchambers to beg for their favor. The foxes share people's food and drink. They do not serve a single master. At the time, there was a figure of speech saying, where there is no fox demon, no village can be established. And here's the source that I got this from. And see, again, here we see some complexity to this. Foxes are being called devout. They say they eat your soul. They're barbarians. They're people who they're for lack of a better term, dirty peasants who are stealing people, the rightful places of the aristocracy. But they're also, part of the celestial realm and gods, and they're being worshipped as beneficial spirits, and in some cases deities by the commoners and peasants of Tang Dynasty China. And it was also during this period of time, during the Tang Dynasty, that Daji, uh, the historic consort of the last king of the Xiang Dynasty, which existed uh, between 1600 to 1046 CE. During this time, she began to be depicted as a 1,000-year-old nine-tailed fox, where temples and shrines began to be dedicated to her worship and began to appear. Which now brings us to the next section, fox spirits during the Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty lasting specifically between 960 and 1279 CE. And here is the Song Dynasty, what is most commonly known as the Northern Song Dynasty. Of course, it is all of East China, what is now East China proper. Um, but then later on, northern China would be conquered by the Jurchens of Eastern Mongolia and what is also known as in Manchuria, what is known as Inner Mongolia, who would then establish the Jin dynasty. I know another Jin dynasty. There's a lot of them. And so during this period, during the Song Dynasty, fox spirit cults and temples, especially ones dedicated to Daji. Also, I need to state I've also heard it pronounced Daki. I'm not sure which is correct, so if anybody who speaks Chinese um, wants to correct me on this, feel free. But anyways, especially ones dedicated to Daji began to be outlawed during the Song Dynasty. And also during the Song Dynasty, Taoist monks and Song officials began conducting large-scale suppression of local fox spirit cults in northern China and began to perform regular exorcisms of fox spirit shrines. And then on the eve of the Jurchen invasion of the northern section of the Song Dynasty, Song Emperor Xiang would order the destruction of all fox spirit temples in Kaifeng. Kaifeng in northern China. Sorry, Kaifeng is the capital of the Song Dynasty, and then Kaifeng in northern China would be taken by the Jurchens just 5 months later. All this happening in 1127 CE. That being said, despite the attempts of the Song court, fox spirit cults would continue to thrive in northern China during the Jurchen Jin dynasty and the Mongol Yuan dynasty, which would last between 1127, being the Jurchen dynasty. This period would last between 1127 and 1368, which is the fall of the Mongol Yuan dynasty. And here is the Jurchen Jin dynasty right here. And here is the Mongol Yuan dynasty. Which brings us to our next section, fox spirits in the Ming and Qing dynasties. So the Ming dynasty lasted between 1368 and 1644 CE, and here is its greatest extent seen here. In the Qing dynasty, which would succeed the Ming dynasty through conquest, would last between 1644 and 1911 CE. And here is it at its greatest extent, which is essentially, for the most part, China as we know it today, though at this point in time it had parts of Southeast Asia, uh, and it had control of Taiwan, and had parts of Mongolia and Russia. So during the Ming and Qing dynasties, fox spirits were compared and contrasted with gui or ghosts. Ji Yun, a scholar during the Qing dynasty, describes in his text similarities between fox spirits and ghosts in their tendency to steal the life force of humans, stating that, quote, ghosts are lingering life energies which will gradually reduce and disperse into nothing. If they obtain further life essence of living souls to replenish themselves, their existence can be extended. That is why female ghosts often have sex with mortals in order to assimilate their essence. Male ghosts cannot assimilate the human essence through sex, therefore, they kill people to gain the life essence. Ghosts obtain the human essence through the art of Kaibu, or gleaning the essence from another to replenish oneself, used by foxes. And here's the source that I got this information from. That being said, in contrast, the story of Liang Xiang, written by Qing Dynasty writer Pu Songling, a fox in the story, a fox spirit called Liang Xiang describes the differences between fox spirits and ghosts to a young scholar, with the conversation going as follows, quote, and I quote, to engage in the sexual act with a living person after night is harmful, let alone with a ghost, said Leon Jiang. Li asked, fox spirits can kill. Through what art do you alone avoid this? There is a type of fox that sucks human breath away, but I am not of that species, said Leon Zhang. So you see, harmless foxes do exist in this world, but harmless ghosts do not, because their yin energy is so abundant. And here's the information that I got this from. So as you can see here, within the Ming Dynasty, one, there's still that idea that fox spirits drain your life force, but there's also a, I don't want to say a debate, but there are conflicting ideas at the very least of whether or not fox spirits are the same as Gui or ghosts or are different. Though it's important to note, despite this or these difference of ideologies, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, Hujian or fox god cults became increasingly popular in northern China. It is also during this period that fox spirits, in these Ming and Qing era, fox cults were connected with ancestor worship. With a Ming story, dynasty story describing this relationship, stating that, quote, Sifter Zhang's family in Kaifeng offered fruits and cakes to the ancestors during the new year. For 2 days, some of the offerings disappeared. Zhang wondered about it, and in the night he hid under the altar table to find out. At the second drumbeat, a white fox appeared to steal the food. Zhang stood up at once and obstructed its way. The fox suddenly turned into an old, gray-haired man. Zhang then called him father and prepared him food and drink with great care. The fox was really pleased, saying, I have a filial son, and drank till he was inebriated. He decided to stay permanently at Zhang's home. Whatever Zhang needed, the fox would get it for him. In 3 years, Zhang's wealth amounted to tens of thousands, and he was able to build extravagant mansions. His eldest son bought an office, and the youngest son married a daughter of a princess. And here's the source that I got this information from. So you can see here during this period, during the Ming and Qing dynasty, fox spirits were beginning to be associated with ancestors and the spirits of ancestors. Now, one could argue that that's sort of the same as the connection to Gui ghosts. However, it's also important to note that Gui ghosts. Um, were viewed in a negative context, whereas the spirits of ancestors were viewed in a positive context. So there is a distinction. And then also during this period, fox spirits in these Ming and Qing era fox cults were also connected to sex and wealth. With one Ming Dynasty account describing an instance where, quote, during the Xiaojing period, 1522 to 1566 CE, the wife of of a Dechou man, Cho, was sexually deluded by a demonic fox. In the beginning, the family suffered bitterly. Later, they tried telling the fox what they needed, and the fox always stole things to satisfy them. Because of this, the family soon became very wealthy. Therefore, they piled two haystacks behind their house and let the fox live there. When Cho's grandson became the head of the family, he disliked this and wanted to tear down the haystacks in order to build a new house or new houses. The fox became very angry. I have made your family enjoy wealth and happiness for generations. If you kick me out perfidiously, don't you believe that I can send you back to poverty? The grandson was deeply terrified, and he raised the haystacks every year, so much so that it looked like hills from far away. The family remained the richest in the whole prefecture. And again, here's the source that I got this information from. So in this source, you can see that fox spirits are to pull from European folklore and Scandinavian folklore, sort of very similar to, say, a Tomte or a Nissi, a house spirit, that provides not necessarily wealth but prosperity to an individual's home. Not necessarily the same, but it is an interesting aspect that we begin to see develop in fox cults and develop with the idea and beliefs of fox spirits during the Ming and Qing dynasties. And then also during this period, um, similar to sex and wealth, fox spirits in Ming and Qing era fox cults were also connected to wealth and female virtue, with one Qing dynasty text describing how, quote, a certain Li from Hainan immigrated to Suzhou, modern day Anhui. Uh, he was utterly destitute and earned his livelihood as a hired laborer. One day, a beautiful woman called to him from the field ditch. Li did not dare respond. The woman said, I am a fox. The predestined fate of our past life brings us together, so I venture to be my own matchmaker. She also said, I am not the kind that harms you. Lee was suspicious of her bewitchment. but fascinated by her beauty, so he lived with her thereafter. She suggested Lee move to another village and build big houses. In a few years, his properties and farms extended for miles. The whole village looked up to the Lees. The place came to be called Lee Village. The fox was virtuous in nature. She did not produce any heir, so she bought a concubine for Lee and raised the concubine's son as her own. Having lived like this for a long time, she began to introduce the art of guiding energies to Li and exhort him to abstain from sex. She urged Li to sleep alone and that the concubine should not be in his company. Li's relatives believed she was an alien species wielding bewitching arts, and they sought to exorcise her. One day, when she was drunk, Lee beguiled her into shrinking her body and entering a bottle. He sealed the bottle with a charm and boiled it. A while later, a few drops of blood were left in the water. Lee's family soon declined. Lee and his concubine died, and this was followed by the untimely death of their son. And here's the source that I got this information from. So again, we see the connection with wealth, but we also see this connection with female virtue, and also um, a connection with um, the idea that if you kill the fox spirit, you lose your wealth, and the idea of some sort of superiority of the wife, traditional, Chinese wives to concubines and courtesans, which again falls into the female virtue idea. Also, in the Ming and Qing dynasties, many men and women would become spirit mediums for fox spirits, with these mediums allowing themselves to be possessed by the fox spirits to provide services such as healing and fortune telling. In 1930 CE, during the Republic of China, Li Jinghong, a Chinese sociologist, would go on to describe healing rituals used by spirit mediums, with Li stating that, quote, when farmers contract mental illness or fall severely sick, the family invites a woman who can invoke the Great Shan, or Great Shin. The Shin usually descends in the night, and a separate room has to be prepared and shielded in advance. No light is allowed. Cooked eggs and liquor have to be offered on the table top of the Kong, a platform particular to northern China, serving as both a bed and dining area. When the woman arrives, she has to first burn incense to invite the Shin until the incense burns out, then sits on the side of the Kong and reserves the main seat of the Kong for the Shin. Suddenly, something rattles. She says that the Shin has come. The family members quickly kowtow and invite the Shin to drink the liquor and eat the eggs. The sounds of drinking and eating can be heard. The medium asks the Shin, what kind of disease has the patient contracted? The great Shin answers, half speaking and half singing, this person has contracted such and such disease. The questions and answers go back and forth for a while, and the cause of the disease, the cures, and several kinds of simple medicine are explained clearly. The voice of the Shin is so thin and weak that it sounds like a woman's. Sometimes the great Shin even uses a white, fleshy hand to massage the patient. And you can see this is the source that I got this information from. But as you can see here, the again this connection with the idea that fox spirits are beneficial and in some way again connected to the celestial realm and deities to some degree. Uh, and it's important to note that for women in the Ming and Qing dynasties, becoming a spirit medium granted increased independence from traditional Chinese patriarchal family roles. And furthermore, it allowed women to earn a living without being completely under the control of traditional Chinese patriarchal authority. Um, and in fact, a 1940 CE account of a woman medium in Beijing during the Chinese occupation of northern China describes this phenomenon, with the account stating that, quote, every day after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she was in a state of ecstasy. She paid little attention to her domestic affairs and ran vehemently around the village. Her husband beat her with a rod, but she did not seemed to be afraid of it. Neighbors informed her husband that at night several persons had seen an old woman going into their house. Probably the Xinjia had changed into the shape of the old woman. Nothing but saying prayers was left to the husband. He asked the spirit to abstain from further possession and promised to let his wife be a servant of the spirit. And here's the source I got this information from. But as you can see in here, based on this account, one, it's not surprising that the wife would seek this job to gain some degree of independence, especially when it's describing her husband beating her. But you can also see another good example of what spirit mediums and fox spirits were believed, one, their connection and what fox spirits were believed to be capable of doing in connection with the spirit mediums. Uh, it's also important to note that during the Ming and Qing dynasties, the connection of fox spirits with spirit mediums, female sexuality, uh, young women and marginal groups such as prostitutes helped maintain the popular connection between the Queen Mother of the West and fox spirits. In addition, fox spirits became connected to matron goddesses such as Baijia Yuanjun. Uh, in both cases, fox spirits were seen, and still are in the modern day, seen as attendants of the goddesses. And then, of course, unsurprisingly, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, communities in northern China worshipped a variety of gods, such as the Jade Emperor, Quan Di, or Kuan Yin. However, they reserved prayers for help in their daily lives for animal spirits, such as fox spirits. In we can see this in the 1940s, this described in the 1940s by Chinese ethnographer Li Weishu, who recorded this phenomenon in his writings, stating that, quote, most people are mistaken in maintaining the opinion that villagers have a boundless belief in the idols of the temple's Miaoshen. In fact, the natives have no high esteem for the statues in the temples as far as supernatural influence on human welfare is concerned. Statues are for them inanimate beings. The idols are worshipped more as symbols of perfect goodness than as a source of help for the needs of earthly life. As a matter of fact, innumerable temples are doomed to decay, and the effigies are in lamentable ruins. But in a good number of the temples, vows are still made. Shu Yuan, and votive boards, Kwa Pian, are donated by faithful believers. I made inquiries among the villagers on the question of why the fate of the temples in the countryside is so unequal. The natives there explained to me that only those temples of which the god Miaoshin is known for his efficiency in granting miraculous help, Ling Yin, are flourishing. This statement is not contradictory to what we have said above, that temple idols are but considered as mere inanimate beings. The great reputation temple statues enjoy is due to the belief that they are used by sacred animals to display their supernatural power. It is not then that the representation of a certain god or saint that is visited by the people, but the animal ghost dwelling in the clay figure or in the wooden sculpture, and in the presence of this living being, people have confidence, not in the lifeless idol. Rural communities often have several Kwanti temples, but perhaps only one of them is prosperous and kept in good condition, while the rest are left to decay. The innermost and very realistic reason for such phenomenon is that this particular effigy of Kwanti is inhabited by one of the four sacred animals. And here's the source that I got this information from. So we can see in the source one sort of a continuation of the idea that fox spirits are connected to ancestor worship, the celestial realm, and wealth and things like that. But we were also beginning to see sort of a hierarchy of deities here, which is not surprising that hierarchies of deities and polytheistic pantheons have always existed. But we begin to see this sort of in connection to animal spirits, where um, it's not necessarily, say fox spirits are less important than the greater deities such as the Jade Emperor, Quan Di, Kuan Yin, or the other way around, but it seems to be more like the Jade Emperor and Quan Di and Kuan Yin are, say, more important for the broader order of the cosmos, whereas fox spirits are more important for and other animal spirits, as described in this text, are more important for the daily lives and the daily needs of people. So again, sort of a hierarchy, a separation, whatever you want to call it, but in an interesting one at that. Now, of course, much like the preceding eras, it's not all positive. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, which, by the way, I've already done videos on and in-depth videos on that I'll include in the iCard. During these dynasties, imperial officials would begin to associate fox spirits with people they viewed as outsiders or undesirables, such as prostitutes and wanderers. And also during the Ming and Qing dynasties, imperial officials also associated fox spirits with outlaws and rebels, with Qing dynasty writer Pu Songling describing this comparison in one of his stories, stating that, quote, during the Shunji reign, which happened between 1644 and 1661 CE, in the counties of Ting and Yi, 7 out of every 10 people were bandits, and the officials did not dare arrest them all. Later, when they surrendered to the government, the magistrates classified them separately as bandit households, or Dao Hu. Whenever there was conflict between these households and the good local people, the magistrate used to slant their decisions in favor of the rebels, fearing that otherwise they might rebel again. So it came about that the litigants would falsely claim to be bandit households, and their opponents would struggle to prove the claim invalid. Both claims would have to be laid out, and therefore one could decide the rights and wrongs of the case. One had to decide if the claim to be a bandit was true or false. Back and forth went the arguments and counter arguments. Much time was spent checking registries. It happened that in one of the magistrate's yamens there were a great many fox spirits, and since they bewitched the magistrate's daughter, he sent for a man of arts, Shu Shi. The latter, by means of a spell, trapped the spirits in a bottle, which he was about to throw in a fire. At one point, one of the foxes in the bottle shouted out, "But I am from a bandit household." None of those who heard could hold back his laughter. And here's the source that I got this information from. But as you can see here, this is a situation very similar to in the Tang Dynasty, where fox spirits were being compared to peoples that were deemed as barbarians and savage in the eyes of the Tang Dynasty elites. And only in this case, in the eyes of the Ming and Qing Dynasty elites, that association is now being made with rebels and bandits. And also, as seen in the earlier slide, concubines and wanderers. Also, during the Ming Dynasty and Qing dynasties, fox spirits and fox spirit mediums were viewed by imperial officials as threat to the traditional Chinese patriarchal society, with one account from the Qing dynasty explaining how the imperial officials viewed spirit mediums, with the account stating that, quote, female mediums, Tianjin claimed to be able to invoke spirits as mediums and cure illness by watching burning incense heads. People called them aunties, uh, uh, Gunyang Ji. I'm sorry if I butchered that to anyone who speaks Chinese. Foolish village folks are ignorant and often call them when they are ill. The medium burns incense, murmurs as in her sleep. Then, after a while, says the spirit she invokes has descended. Some spirits claim to be Granny Bai Liao Tai Tai. Or some are called Mistress Huang Xiao Nai Nai, or Auntie Hu Mog Gugu, or Mo Gugu. The names they choose are mostly female. As iron is drawn to a magnet, women are easily deluded. The female members of the modest families all believe in this. The mediums treat illness by either giving pills or bestowing holy water. If the patient is cured, they take credit for it. If not, blame the patient's fate. If not, they blame the patient's fate. They ask quite high prices for incense and medicinal expenses. And here's the source I got this information from. But as you can see here, it's a very negative view of female spirit mediums. Really, all spirit mediums as a whole, but generally female spirit mediums, which, as you can see here in this text, were women were viewed as let's just go out and say it, they're viewed as dumb and naive and things such as that, which of course is not true, but it was very unsurprising to see wealthy, affluent government officials thinking these things, especially in Imperial China. Uh, and of course, in connection with this, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, imperial officials would regularly conduct exorcisms of fox spirits, as they viewed fox spirits as symbols of chaos and challenges to both imperial authority and the celestial hierarchy of the gods. Now, that being said, also during the Ming and Qing dynasties, occasionally imperial officials would call upon the help of spirit mediums and fox spirits at fox shrines, despite their negative view of both spirit mediums and fox spirits. However, this was only done as a last resort and was also often done in secret, or at least they tried to do it under the table. Now, all that being said, despite widespread exorcisms of fox spirits during the Ming and Qing dynasties, imperial governmental buildings known as yamen were often the favorite nesting places of local foxes. Sitting here and here are the yamen. And during the late Qing dynasty, in fact, fox spirits would begin to take on the role of the great guardians of the official imperial seal. Uh, and we can see this talked about in multiple late Qing documents where they describe this new role for fox spirits. We see Feng En describing how, quote, Mr. Li Guoji of Taihu came to Zhejiang to inspect the educational system. The offices of the educational officials were comprised of three buildings, and on the upper floor of the building lived Xiang, or fox deities or fox spirits. Lu Lin states that, quote, the Yangming quarters of the provincial governor of Hubei always has many foxes. Nobody dare to live in the five buildings situated in the back. Behind the Yamen is a temple where monks and nuns live, and it is occupied by foxes. Zhui Fu Sheng recounts how, quote, there is a small room behind the Yamen office in the circuit of Ningbo in Shaojing, where a god of wealth was worshipped. By the side of the god of wealth were three statues with gray hair and beards. I asked some old Yamen runners who told me these were foxes. Here's the source that I got this information from. But as you can see here, again, we have some sort of contradiction and nuance to the way fox spirits were viewed during the Ming and Qing dynasty. So they were viewed as deities and beneficial sort of middlemen, or um, uh, the sort of go-to spirits and deities for your daily concerns in the eyes of the common folk, the peasants, whatever you want to call them, the everyday people. They were used and viewed as ways of healing for spirit mediums. They were equated with ghosts. Uh, they were equated with the divine and the celestial realm. They were equated with uh, wealth, sex. They were equated with outlaws and other negative people and outsiders, undesirables uh, concubines and wanderers. Um, they were viewed as bringers of chaos and disruptors to order, but at the same time, they were later on viewed as the guardians of the imperial order and imperial hierarchy, and again the imperial seal. So we're seeing across multiple periods in Chinese history, in dynasty, multiple Chinese dynasties, a complex picture of what fox spirits are. Which brings us into the next section, fox spirits in modern China. Starting with the Republic of China, which lasted between 1911 and 1949 CE. And here is its rough the rough borders of the Republic of China, which, as you can see, is in much diminished form as compared to the Qing Dynasty. And then there's also the People's Republic of China, which overthrew, for the most part, the Republic of China. Of course, the Republic of China fled from mainland China to Taiwan, where they currently remain. Um, and the People's Republic of China began in 1949 CE and lasted into the modern day. It is currently the China that we in the modern world know. And here is the People's Republic of China uh, here, which again is just China in as we know it in the modern world. So, with that in mind, fox cults would survive in northern China well into the 1960s CE. However, with the rise of the People's Republic of China, the People's Republic of China would attempt to eradicate all religions, including fox cults, with the socialist education movement. However, these attempts at suppression of the fox cults would fail, with the socialist education movement happening between 1963 and 1965 CE. And so, because of this, Chinese folk religions, including fox cults, persist in modern China in the modern day, despite attempts to eradicate religion in China. Again, from 1965 into the present. And then in the modern day, in the present, nine-tailed foxes appear in a variety of popular media, including the anime series of Naruto and movies such as Xiang Jia, which is about the fall of the Shang Dynasty and the fox Vixen Daji, also, or Daki. Again, if anybody who speaks Chinese can tell me the correct pronunciation, that would be very well appreciated. All right, so with that, that ends our second Halloween video for 2025. I hope everyone watching enjoyed learning about uh, this very interesting and complex subject about this creature that has a very long history in China's religious, cultural, and folklore spheres. A very deep connection in Chinese culture. Uh, very contradictory creature, as we discussed multiple times. So again, I hope you enjoyed all of that. If you would like to see me cover any of the things that I talked about in the video in greater detail in later videos, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you all have a good day and a happy Halloween.